All right. Welcome to today's Botanacor webinar. I have Mike here. He is our president and founder of Botanacor Laboratories. We are going to talk about CDPHE rules. The way that we've structured today's meeting is we're going to give about a half an hour presentation about the rules, a quick overview of the testing rules specifically, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We have a few questions that have already come in prior to this webinar today, but if you would like to ask questions during the webinar, just go ahead and use the Q&A feature on the Zoom, and you can ask questions and then we'll do those at the end. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Mike and he can introduce himself.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Mike Brandvold with the Botanacor Laboratories. And as Lisa said, I'll talk about the CDPHE rules to try to give you guys at least a little bit of insight based on what we have interpreted from the rules. And really it'll be kind of focused mostly around testing, although there's other rules that are, or other pieces to the rule that are required. Some of them are tangential to our testing piece of it, so I'll touch on those in certain areas. So without further ado, about Botanacor, really quick, we specialize in compliance and quality control testing for hemp and hemp-derived products. We are a national lab located in Denver. We serve the United States and, in fact, in a lot of other non-US markets as well. We're an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory. We're registered with the CDPHE, certified, pending. We just got our audit wrapped up with that on Tuesday of this week. So we expect the certification coming within the next week or two. And then finally, we operate under the GMP, GLP compliant framework. So let's get into the rules. So what rules, right? For those of you who have kind of been following, there are, for the first time in kind of the history of the hemp space, other than the Farm Bill, there are a set of rules that are being applied to hemp and hemp manufacturers. And those are being applied by the CDPHE, or the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. The rules include, as I said, testing, but there's also labeling, manufacturing, and a number of other elements to this. For the full regulations, we have included a site here, or a link to the website. We encourage you to go through the rules a couple of times. There's a lot to them, and it would be worth your time, kind of taking a deep dive into these to be prepared for the July 1st deadline. So who do the rules apply to? Colorado manufacturers. Ultimately, it's for finished and unfinished industrial hemp products that are manufactured in Colorado, that are made and produced for human consumption. And they are for finished hemp products for cosmetics, dietary supplements, foods and additives, and so on and so forth. Who do they not apply to? They're not intended for non-human consumption, i.e. textiles, whether it's paper, construction materials, type product. And then this also does not address whatsoever smokable or inhalable products. So who needs to test and when do they need to test? It's been a kind of a complex web, and there's been a lot of questions, and there's some clarity hopefully we can bring to this, but ultimately there's the cultivators, extractors, finished product manufacturers, and then there's a variety of different tests that are required to be done, some in the potency and others in the contaminant. What I want to do is kind of break that up from potency to contaminants and talk about each of those individually. But ultimately, the big picture of the scenarios that the different parts of the supply chain need to test, think about it in this manner. And this is how the CDPHE has explained it to us. So if we start at the very end, which is the finished product manufacturer, or the term that they use are industrial hemp products, they are required to use approved ingredients. Now, there is a list on the CDPHE website of certain suppliers that are pre-approved. That doesn't mean that you're required to use those suppliers. You can use your own suppliers as well, so long as you have your own internal QA processes identify that they're an approved supplier for your process, right? But now consider this: the oil itself, or the concentrate, is one of the ingredients that needs to be approved. And this process of testing for compliance for both potency and for contaminants is the approval process for this. So, for example, the manufacturers of the oils and concentrates, that is one of the ingredients that goes into the finished product. So that needs to be tested thoroughly or demonstrated that it is coming in contaminant free. And then the finished product manufacturers need to use that approved ingredient, which has already been tested for all the contaminants and potency. And then also they need to demonstrate that it is free of microbial contamination. The thought process here is this: even though that you are using a product that is free from these contaminants, there could be microbial contaminants that are introduced into that finished product during the manufacturing of that finished product. Therefore, microbials also has to be tested at the finished product stage of that, as well as potency. So that's kind of the big picture. The CDPHE has a link on their website of scenarios, and it goes into much more detail than what I've just described, but it's definitely worth your while to go in there, download that document, and take a look to see where you fit into that overall theme. So as I said, I want to break this up into two kind of criteria here: potency and contaminants. So I'll start with potency, and ultimately this is based on percent THC only. So there are no requirements for a CBD label claim. For example, if you are making a 10 milligram gummy, it does not need to be, per the rule in this revision anyway, it does not need to be 10 milligrams plus or minus any percent. It is all based on THC only, and I'll get into all the specifics of that. On the contaminants, there are 5 main contaminants that are being tested for: microbials, mycotoxins, heavy metals, residual solvents, and pesticides. So I'll take a deep dive into each of these now. So as we look at the potency, it's all based on some definitions that I want to start with. So first and foremost, industrial hemp, which is really plant material, flower, biomass, what have you. And this is defined as any part of the cannabis sativa plant, excuse me, that contains no more than 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis. So the industry up to now has really regarded this as no more than 0.3% THC. We've got a number of customers that test this on a dry weight basis, but by and large, most folks up to now have been testing just purely 0.3% THC as the product is submitted to us. So what does that mean? What does this dry weight basis mean? Ultimately, it means we're running a potency analysis on this hemp material, and then we are also running a moisture analysis on the hemp material. Now, we're doing it by Carl Fisher, and there's some reasons for that, and if there's questions on that, I'm happy to get into that later. But ultimately, this dry weight basis means that we are combining the potency analysis and the percent moisture analysis to test that on a dry weight basis. So we're really subtracting out the moisture and taking that into account with the potency value. So the next definition that I want to talk about is unfinished industrial hemp product. Long way of saying concentrate, whether it's distillates, other oils, isolates, and whatnot. So that is defined as a concentrate that has a total THC concentration between 0.3 and 5.0%. So as you're probably well aware, if I take a plant material and I concentrate that down, on average, that's about a 10x concentration. So it's really been this, I've called it this elephant in the room. You can start with a compliant hemp plant material, and that's less than 0.3% THC, concentrate that down, and then you are left with an oil that is above the 0.3% THC, which is defined in the Controlled Substances Act as marijuana. And so that is the starting material that then obviously gets diluted down. And it's been this elephant in the room because everybody knows that this is part of the process to make the product, including the regulators. So what Colorado has done is said, okay, we recognize that this is an unfinished product. It's in this intermediate state. We know that the further processing will dilute this down into a product that is defined as not marijuana. So long as it remains in this 0.3 to 5.0%, and it remains in the stream of commerce of CDPHE registrants, then this product is allowed to kind of exist, if you will. So it's important to note that this product at this stage is not allowed to eject out into the general public stream of commerce, because that would be ultimately ejecting what is considered a marijuana product out into the public. So it's important to consider your records, and this is part of the rules. I'm not going to go terribly deep into the records, but per the rule, a concentrate manufacturer is required to demonstrate that he has accurate and consistent records of his product. So that really what that means is that they can show that they have industrial hemp that has come into their facility. They have prepared this unfinished industrial hemp product with a concentrate, and then that is going to get transferred to finished product manufacturer, whether that's an external company or that's integrated into your own company in a vertical. That makes no difference, but so long as that finished product manufacturer is registered with the CDPHE and you can show your records you have transferred to that entity. Likewise, the finished product manufacturer must have records showing that he accepted unfinished industrial hemp product that is in this 0.3 to 5.0% from a concentrate manufacturer. So both parties need to have that same record to show that this transfer was made and they are both CDPHE registrants. And then so finally, finished industrial hemp product, i.e. finished product. So the definition in the CDPHE rules is a product that's suitable for the stream of commerce that contains no more than 0.3% THC. So I'll dive into that a little bit deeper here on the next slide. So industrial hemp product. There are two definitions that I want to talk about that are addressed in the CDPHE rules. And then because it's very similar, I'll also address another one that has really been driven by commerce and some markets outside of the US. So full spectrum is an industrial hemp product that contains all the phytochemicals naturally found in the plant, trace cannabinoids, terpenes, and essential oils with no more than 0.3% THC. Okay, broad spectrum is industrial hemp product that contains no more than 0.01% total THC. So I'll get into a little bit of the math in the next couple of slides, but it's important to understand that if you are labeling your finished product as a full spectrum product, that the sample may not contain more than 0.3% THC. If you are labeling your product as broad spectrum, then you must demonstrate that that has no more than 0.01% total THC in that product. And then finally, THC-free. So we refer to this as our trace THC method at Botanacor, but ultimately, this is industrial hemp product that contains no more than 0.001% THC. But we have a number of customers that are regulating, whether it's self-regulating or from the EU, for THC-free, so that, and they can demonstrate that they're not more than 0.001% THC. So what does that look like kind of chromatographically and mathematically? So in general, a UV detector, which is what we use on HPLCs, has a linear dynamic range of 3 magnitudes of order. It's actually just shy of 3 magnitudes of order, but for the sake of simplicity, I want to demonstrate what 3 magnitudes of order looks like. If I am taking a product, say it's a distillate that's, you know, in the 90s, or an isolate that's, you know, approaching 100%. If I have 100% product of CBD and I'm looking all the way down for all the minor cannabinoids, the furthest I can look is 3 magnitudes of order down, which gets me all the way down to 0.1%. So that covers the 0.3% defined by the full spectrum product. But in a single injection, if my dynamic range is only 3 magnitudes of order, the best I can do, if I have a very concentrated product, i.e. close to 100% or above 90%, can only get down to about 0.1%. So if I'm looking at broad spectrum, I'm going to need to ultimately make some adjustments. So if you consider, that's approximately where full spectrum would be. If you consider what broad spectrum would look like, I would need to be able to detect down below our quantitation and detection limits. Broad spectrum would be another magnitude of order lower than what I can achieve in the dynamic range of a detector. So therefore, what I will do is I will take that sample and I will do a 1 to 10 dilution, which is ultimately a magnitude of order. And then now my range has changed into the broad spectrum. And so now the most I can detect is about 10% while still capturing the 0.01% THC concentration defined for broad spectrum. Same holds true when I move to THC-free. So you'll see the graph change again at THC-free. Ultimately, I lose another magnitude of order on the top end to be able to gain a magnitude of order on the bottom end to capture the THC-free requirement. Again, THC-free, not a requirement in the CDPHE, but I wanted to go through the exercise so you kind of understand what's going on and what does that mean to you. So if you are testing for THC-free or for broad spectrum, that is not going to be a single injection and a single analysis. We will do our initial analysis to capture everything on the high end, and then a second analysis based on whichever dilution factor that we're going to use to be able to capture either THC-free or broad spectrum. So it's 2 analyses to be able to capture whichever kind of selection that we're looking for on this. So in summary, we've talked a little bit about dry weight potency, which is applied to the farmers. It's applied to the plant material, and that's 0.3% on a dry weight basis. That will be performed using 2 tests, a moisture analysis and a potency test. Talked about unfinished industrial hemp product, which is concentrates, and that is the allowance levels of THC on that, of total THC, are 0.3 to 5.0%. Talked about full spectrum, broad spectrum, and THC-free, which are 0.3, 0.01, and 0.001 accordingly there. So moving on to the contaminants. Contaminants that are required in the CDPHE rules are microbials, mycotoxins, heavy metals, residual solvents, and pesticides. Microbials. There's the 5 microbials that we're already currently testing for you, and are pretty consistent with other regulatory framework. They are Salmonella, Estech bacteria, which is shikatoxin producing E. coli, which is really just a long way of saying the pathogenic E. coli. Then there are total coliforms, total aerobics, and total yeast and mold. So the situation with this is this. The requirements are Salmonella and F-Tech. It must be none detected in 25 grams of sample. So what does that mean? That means that the sample size that is submitted to us must be at a minimum of 25 grams of sample for those two bacteria only. That doesn't take into account the coliforms, aerobics, and yeast and mold, or any of the analytical tests. So we're able to accommodate the sample prep with Salmonella and F-Tech using a single 25 grams of sample. So I'm not saying that I need two individual 25 grams. I need a single 25 grams sample for that. Then we do the sample prep, and then we split it off in PCR and look for whichever assay that we're looking for, whether it's F-Tech or Salmonella. Same holds true on total coliforms, aerobics, and yeast and mold. I can accommodate that with a single gram. So there's specifications that are for total coliforms, it's not more than 10 to the 2 per gram of sample. For total yeast and mold, it's not more than 10 to the 3rd per gram of sample. And then for total aerobics, it's not more than 10 to the 4th per gram of sample. So again, I can accommodate all three of those with a single gram of sample. I don't need 3 individual grams. Bottom line is, for microbials, I need a minimum of 26 grams, which is 25 plus the 1, 26 grams of sample to test to meet the requirements set forth in the CDPHE. Now, if you consider this, if you give me a distillate, for example, and you put it in a container and you weigh out exactly 26 grams of sample, I just can't get 100% of that out. There's going to be stuff that sticks to the side of the container that you put it in. There's going to be product that sticks to the utensils that I use to take it out and transfer it to our sterile bags. So we're really saying we need 27 grams. We need a little bit of overage to be able to accommodate the full panel for microbials. All right, moving on to mycotoxins. Mycotoxins include the 4 aflatoxins and ochratoxins. They're the same ones that we have already been testing, and those are at certain levels that are pretty standard in the industry, both on the marijuana, I should say in the marijuana industry, because that's where most of this has been derived for these specifications. Heavy metals, same thing. It's the 4 big ones, which are arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury, and they are at levels that are consistent with what other regulatory bodies on the marijuana industry have set forth for this product. Residual solvents, same story. There are 13 solvents that are being regulated. They're the exact same 13 that at least the state of Colorado marijuana program has put together, and the same action limits. The big difference here, and really the game changer, is pesticides. So the pesticide panel now includes 106 pesticides. So that is a far cry from the 13 that the state of Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division has regulated, and it is significantly more than any of the other states' marijuana programs have put together. California has one of the most robust systems, and they're up at, I think it's 65. This panel has been derived from Canada's list. I'll talk a little bit about that here. So the initial rollout of this 106 pesticide has action levels of many of these analytes at down to 10 parts per billion. So as I said, this is based on Canada's panel. So Canada has a panel of 96 pesticides, with many of these pesticides having a 10 parts per billion action levels. So Colorado adopted that, and then from industry stakeholder recommendations, they added on another 10 pesticide analytes that may be used in different parts of the country that industry stakeholders suggested that the CDPHE add to their list. So that's how this list of 106 was derived. And then the 10 parts per billion action level really appears to have been derived from what Canada kind of started with. So there is a modified implementation process for this. So what happened was this, and I'll save you all the gory details of this, but ultimately the CDPHE released this list of 106 pesticides. Many of the labs responded to the CDPHE and said, okay, that's okay if that's what you're going to do, but we can't meet that. And we're going to have a hard time meeting that by the July 1st deadline. In fact, it's pretty much going to be impossible. Given the fact that no regulatory agency has had levels this low, this is about a magnitude order lower than any other regulatory agency in the United States. What this requires is more complex instrumentation to be able to achieve these 10 parts per billion levels, and then also add on a significant amount to the panels that most different laboratories have already been testing for. So ultimately, the CDPHE understood that information, and they went back to the drawing board, and they kind of did a modified implementation of, they took 59 analytes, which are the same 59 that Oregon's marijuana program includes. So they took those analytes, but they still set that at 10 parts per billion action levels. So that's about a magnitude of order than what Oregon's marijuana program has. So those first 59 out of this phase 1, that goes live on August 1st. Everything else goes live July 1st, but the pesticides has been delayed to be able to give labs time to get up to speed to be able to accommodate the list. So as I said, the 59 starts on August 1st, and then on October 1st, the full 106 pesticide panel goes live for the industry. So there's a bit of time there, which really is intended for the lab to be able to develop and validate pesticides, and really it's going to be on all new equipment for the most part. So reporting requirements, moving on from pesticides. One thing that you'll see that will look a little bit different among a couple of other minor things on the C of A are what I have listed here. So the certificates of analysis per the rule must include the bullet items that I have listed here. One is a statement that the test result is for official compliance for the state of Colorado. So you'll see that. So if you are testing for compliance, that C of A will say official compliance. And if this is a test that is for R&D purposes or for non-human consumption purposes, pet products, textiles, what have you, then you will not get the official compliance on that C of A. That's not to say that you can't test and understand your product, but it won't be for official compliance if it doesn't have this entire battery of tests ultimately. The next thing that we are required to put on there is for industrial hemp products, or industrial hemp, I should say, we have to have an identification if this is pre-harvest or post-harvest retest, which is ultimately a remediation of that product. For industrial hemp, we are required to report the total THC on a dry weight basis. So that will be reported as a dry weight basis for industrial hemp. Also for industrial hemp, it's interesting because the rule says we're required to put the USDA licensee number if applicable. So if the customer has a USDA license and that's applied to us, we will include that on the C of A. And then finally, we are required to put the LOD and LOQ for the potency only on the C of A's and the method uncertainty. And again, that's for potency only. We are working to include all of that on all of our tests, but for the immediate term, that will be included on all of the potency analysis for the official compliance. More reporting requirements. This isn't so much for the C of A, but this is what we are required, we're required to report to. So per the rule, the lab shall, within 1 business day of completing the total THC analysis of the sample, provide a copy of the C of A to the submitting industrial hemp cultivator, i.e. the customer, and also we are required to simultaneously submit that test result and that C of A to the Colorado Department of Ag, to their hemp regulatory program. So they will by definition of this rule, they will simultaneously get a copy of all of those test results as well. Another rule, and this is defined in the CDPHE, is any exceedance of the contaminant action limits shall be reported to the department by the industrial hemp manufacturer within 48 hours of receipt of the analytical test result. So in other words, what this says is the manufacturer, if they receive a test result where the contaminants exceed the action limit, they are required to report that to the CDPHE. The laboratory will not report those results and those failed action limits to the CDPHE. That is left to the manufacturer or the cultivator to report those levels to the CDPHE. So in summary, some of the key dates to keep in mind. July 1st, that's the big day for the majority of the testing. For potency, dry weight for biomass plant material goes live July 1st. There was a little bit of back and forth with the CDPHE for a period of time. For a while, they indicated, at least to us, that was going to go live on January 1st, and which coincides with the CDA's rules. But they have indicated just during our audit this week, they said, nope, this actually goes live on July 1st, no questions asked. So dry weight potency for biomass plant material goes live on July 1st. Full spectrum, broad spectrum also goes live for finished products. Microbial contaminants goes live July 1st, mycotoxins, heavy metals, and residual solvents. What goes live on August 1st is pesticides, the modified panel of 59 analytes, and October 1st, pesticides is the full Colorado panel, which is 106 analytes. Now, it's important to understand that the testing must be completed by a CDPHE certified lab. The timeline enables more labs to become certified. So if this is tested by a laboratory that's outside of the CDPHE certification process, it's not that you can't test with them, but it is not considered a compliant test, and therefore the product wouldn't be considered compliant in the eyes of the CDPHE. And then sample size requirements. I talked a little bit about this for microbials, but ultimately on microbials, I'm starting from the bottom here, we need 27 grams. For all of the analytical tests, we need approximately 3 grams. So what we're telling industry is 30 grams of sample will get you what you need for the full panel of compliance tests. Now, ideally, if we can get those microbial samples separated into a separate container, that's ideal for our workflows so that can go into its aseptic process. If that's unachievable on your end, we can accommodate that. We have a splitting process in a biological safety cabinet so that we can ensure that we don't have any cross-contamination. But ideally, if we can get those split in the way that I have it listed here, 3 grams and 27 grams, that just, it really kind of improves the workflow process. So ordering the right potency test. So potency has the most dynamics in all of this, right? So if you're looking for dry weight potency, realize that that's for biomass only. If you're looking for full spectrum, or I should say, if you're looking for, well, full spectrum, that will be labeled for 0.3% THC. You'll want to order the full spectrum. If you're looking for 0.01% THC, you'll want to order the broad spectrum. If you're looking for 0.001% THC or less, you'll want to order the trace THC. Now, we can still do a standard potency for no label claim, typically for R&D processes, or really even products that are not meant for human consumption. So what to do now? Really read the regulations. Read them carefully, go over them a couple of times, make sure that you're fully aware of what's going on with that. You register with the CDPHE. It's required. If you are a manufacturer of hemp or hemp-derived products in the state of Colorado, you are required to register with the CDPHE. And then finally, ask questions. I don't pretend to know all of the answers by any means, but we've taken a pretty deep dive particularly into the testing part of this. We've had many conversations with the CDPHE. They've been in to audit us. So we can answer a lot of those questions. We're not your attorneys. We're not the regulatory body. So in certain instances, I will, kind of eject and say, discuss this with the CDPHE. They'll have more information than we will, but don't be afraid to ask, and we can give you all the contact information at the CDPHE for who to request information from. And here's some of those resources. For the full regulations, we have a link here for the pesticide kind of panels. Got links here, and then the scenarios that I was talking about at the beginning of this. And then you can always email us at sales@botanacor.com. So I thank you for listening to me today. And what I want to do now is open it up for questions.
Great. So we had a lot of questions come in. Thank you everyone for bringing in your questions. These are great. I'm going to answer the first really easy ones. Yes, we are recording this webinar, and we will send out the recording and the slides after the webinar is done. It'll probably be early next week. But I also want to remind you that the slide deck is not a replacement for the rules. Please do download the real rules because this is our way of just making a summary of the testing. The first question, I also have Dell here too, so we're going to be reading these questions off for Mike to answer.
Okay.
Okay, we have a question from Jack. Will you test for pesticides in finished material or just in starting material?
So our method is validated for starting material. So it's validated for hemp I should say industrial hemp, so the biomass plant material, and also for the oils and concentrates and the whole kind of gamut of oils. We're not validated for pesticides in each of the finished products. It becomes a pretty challenging task to actually accommodate that request. So per the CDPHE's regs, so long as the oil or the concentrate product or the unfinished industrial hemp product is free from those contaminants, free from that pesticides in the oil phase, it is not required to be retested again in the finished products phase because that incoming material has already been deemed pesticide free.
Okay, we have another question in regards to pesticides. Is the pesticide action level the same as reporting out of spec? Or does that mean there is an action needed, but not necessarily out of spec?
So the action levels, as I said, some of them are down to 10 parts per billion, some are up at 100, 120 parts per billion. So those are action levels. We will report those values. If your product is above those action levels, that doesn't, so it means that it can't go into the stream of commerce as is, but you do have the option to remediate that product. And part of the CDPHE's rules address the remediation, and you're required as a manufacturer to contact the CDPHE and work on a remediation plan for your product. So it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to destroy that product, but you can work with the CDPHE to demonstrate what your plan of remediation will be, and then remediate and then retest to demonstrate that that remediation plan has effectively removed those pesticides or any other contaminants that may have exceeded those action limits.
Right. We have a question regarding to THC-free. So can you explain what does it mean that THC-free is not regulated?
It is not defined in the CDPHE rules. So it's really been, it's been regulated within the industry to some degree. And I shouldn't say regulated, but it has been, well, kind of self-regulated. As I understand it, European and Asian markets require THC-free before they can enter their stream of commerce. So those markets require products to be tested at the level of THC-free or 0.001% before they will allow those products into their markets. So that it's regulated, to my understanding, in the EU and in Asian markets. But in the US, and particularly in Colorado, it is not defined and it is not regulated.
Okay, the second part to that question is, what are the testing requirements for isolate, infused, or THC-free cosmetics?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Yes. What are the testing requirements for isolate infused or THC-free cosmetics?
So as I understand it, it's the same requirements. So while those products are not being ingested, they're still for human consumption.
Okay, switching gears, we're going to talk about delta 8 THC. The question is, has CDPHE given an action limit for delta 8 THC? And at what levels do you have to report delta 8 THC to the CDPHE? For example, with a distillate testing with 0.15% delta 8, would the CDPHE need to be notified?
So the CDPHE has very recently released a statement about Delta 8. They have prepared a document and they have put it on their website, which is in the Hemp for Food rules in many, or in the same place as many of these other documents that will give you a link. We will provide you with a link. I know we don't have it on our slide deck, but we can also include that for you. Ultimately, they are looking to ban the production of Delta 8 based on lack of safety data. That's kind of what I know about it right now. It's a hot topic, not only within the CDPHE, but I know some other regulatory bodies are actively looking at this to try to understand what to do with Delta 8.
Currently, the reporting requirement is Delta 9.
That's correct. Currently, the reporting limit is Delta 9 only. So a combination of Delta 9 THC and Delta 9 THCA for total THC.
All right, we have a question from Ken. He wants to know about sample requirements, sample size requirements for liquid products. So in terms of the quantity needed, so milliliters versus grams.
Yeah, so ultimately the test is done in grams. So depending on the density of your product, we'll need 30 milliliters, give or take. We'll need at least 30 grams of sample. So it really is going to be based on the density. I realize it's going to be pretty nominal when you're submitting that much, but 30 grams of sample, however that translates to your volume based on your density of your product.
And just to follow up, and this is a requirement driven by the CPDHE in terms of the sample size.
That's correct. Yeah, this is not a requirement that Botanacor is setting. This is a requirement that the CDPHE requires. The majority of that large sample size is used to test for ESTEC and Salmonella at 25 grams.
Okay, our next question is, can you clarify if the CDPHE requires a full contaminant testing for all finished products, or is that just the concentrate? And all finished products must have THC and microbial testing.
So you're right on with that. Finished products require potency based on either full spectrum or broad spectrum and microbial contaminants. Now, if the finished product manufacturer is using oils or concentrates that have already been tested and are already considered free from the contaminants, then they're free to use that concentrated product for their finished product, so long as they test their final potency in their finished product and microbial contaminants. And that is required to be tested by a CDPHE certified laboratory.
Okay, that actually dovetails right into our next question, which is there a date that labs must be hemp certified? And is this date July 1st?
Yes, laboratories must be certified by July 1st to meet the testing requirements for this. I expect that there probably will be some labs that kind of filter in over time as they kind of gain capacity and instrumentation necessary to be able to accommodate all of the tests. But in order to serve the industry, which is required to start testing by July 1st, the lab that is testing that product must be CDPHE certified by July 1st.
Dylan, he says, you mentioned that the CDPHE only requires industrial hemp ingredients be tested for pesticides rather than finished goods. Is this the same for residual solvents, heavy metals, mycotoxins, and microbials as well?
So this is where it gets somewhat tricky. So there is the scenarios document that the CDPHE has listed on their website. I would encourage you to read through that a couple of times. But ultimately, the big picture out of this is this. If the oil or the concentrate has been tested for the entire list of contaminant tests, then that is considered a compliant ingredient that can be used for a finished product. Now, finished product manufacturers, if they happen to use a oil that has not been tested for any one of those contaminants, then the finished product must be tested for that contaminant in addition to the potency and the microbial analysis.
Okay, we have one last question. If we are selling products outside of Colorado, are we still required to remain within these CDPHE regulations since we are manufacturing in Colorado?
Yes, all manufacturers in Colorado are required to adhere to these rules regardless of where you sell the product.
Thanks, Mike. That is it for our questions. If there's any more questions, actually, you scroll down. We actually have 2 more questions. Okay.
There's more.
Yeah. So John is asking, we have a stock of work in progress products on the shelf, i.e. extract, distillate, etc. Do all of our products that we made before July 1st have to go through compliance testing?
That's a great question. Here is number one, I would say, discuss this with the CDPHE. We can give you the contact at the CDPHE for whom will have the direct answer. But consider this. So far that you've made the concentrate pre-July 1st. If that gets transferred to a finished product manufacturer and they prepare their finished products after July 1st, they are working with what would be considered a non-compliant starting material. So they would be on the hook for testing that incoming oil or the finished product for the full battery of tests. So long as the finished product is manufactured pre-July, I think there's room on that side. But even if the starting material is transferred to a finished product manufacturer who is manufacturing post-July 1st, then that would need to be tested for the compliance purposes.
All right. Our next question, if an ingredient was tested by the extractor who sold it, is it the responsibility of the finished good manufacturer to test it again upon receipt of the ingredient? And will the extractor's testing suffice?
Yeah, it's my understanding that the extractor's testing will suffice so long as you can show your records. So you will want to have those C of A's transferred to you so that that gets populated in your collection of documents to be able to present to the CDPHE when they come on site for their audit.
Always be on the hook for microbial.
Great point. But I'll add to that, the finished product manufacturer will always need to test for potency and microbial contaminants.
And we have a question from Lacey. What about ingredients other than oils? Are there any testing requirements for those, such as additives, flavoring, etc.?
So the requirements for ingredients that are other than oils are that they must be approved supplies, and those supplies can be either used from, CDPHE, predetermined approved supplier, or through your QA system. If you have a supplier approval program, they can be approved through that program itself.
And we have one last question from Jack. Jack says, currently we do a full battery of tests on our raw extract, but on the finished. We do a full battery of tests on our raw extract on the finished product. We only test for potency. We'll be able to do that going forward.
You'll on the finished product, you will be required to add microbial contaminants. That would be if you do the full battery on the oil, on the incoming oil, great. That meets the requirements to be able to go into the finished product. But the finished product, the one thing that you will need to add is microbial contaminants to the finished product.
Okay, and Dylan is asking, do these requirements apply to other ingredients that are not industrially hemp-based? For example, MPP, so this is the previous question.
Yeah, these action levels and testing criteria does not apply to other ingredients other than hemp and hemp-based materials.
I think this might have been answered. Second, if we are selling products outside of Colorado, are we still required to remain within the CDPHE regulations since we are manufacturing? I think that was just a repeat. Yep.
Yes, if you're manufacturing product in the state of Colorado, you're required to adhere to these rules, regardless of where you're selling product to.
Okay, another question from Jack. We answered this earlier, but we can just answer it again. Jack currently has a large inventory of finished products on our shelves. What are we required to do with those products?
Yeah, so this is actually a little bit different than what we answered last time. Last time we answered, somebody had an inventory of oil. So you having an inventory of finished products that's already manufactured pre-July 1. I will eject this one to the CDPHE. I don't know the answer, to be quite honest with you. I think the CDPHE would probably give you some allowance, but you would certainly want to discuss that with them, and not take my word on that particular one, because that's a question that I've had as well. As long as the finished product is manufactured pre-July, go ahead and speak with the CDPHE on that one to get confirmation.
All right, are there any more questions? Okay, it looks like that's it. Yeah, thank you so much for attending today. And we will send an email out with a link to this webinar, and we'll also provide links to the CDPHE's website so you can get some more information. And as always, feel free to reach out to us at support@botanacor.com or our 800 number. Thank you so much, and thank you for using Botanacor, and we hope to hear from you soon.